Hello, my name is Dominic Dorsey, and I'm the Director of Accessibility here at Grand Rapids Community College. And today I have the distinguished pleasure of introducing fellow activist and author, luxury automotive specialist, rock star gadgeteer, video game and talking toy tinkerer, scholar, educated, and devoted father, and our next presenter at the Diversity Speaker Series, the incomparable Mr. John Elder Robison. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me here with you.
Oh, it's our pleasure entirely. How are you today?
I'm pretty much all right. You know, it's an early start. I left home at 5 a.m. to come here, and outside of the early departure, I'm pretty well fine.
Okay, and you braved the cold for us, so we especially appreciate that.
Well, this is much the same as where I live back home, and also when I come out here, I always feel welcome because Michigan and Wisconsin have been two of the states that have really adopted my writing in both colleges and high schools. And I've been fortunate enough actually to get many invitations to come to your part of the Midwest, and I've always been made to feel welcome here.
Well, you definitely are welcome. Just going through the impressive list of accomplishments and personal interests that you have, and while you may have been invited here to talk to us about any one of those, what I failed to mention is that you were diagnosed with Asperger's, a form of autism. Just curious, what was it like growing up and the adventures and the social interactions and the challenges and triumphs that you might have had throughout your lifespan to suddenly one day learn about this diagnosis and that there's a name for it?
Well, anyone, I think, who grows up different in some way feels marginalized. You look wrong or you act wrong, you're the stupid one or you're the one they don't want, you're the ugly one. And I think that in the absence of an innocent explanation, and that was, of course, not available in the 1960s because nobody knew about Asperger's and kids like me, you grow up feeling that you're less than other people. You believe that you're inferior. And throughout my adult life, I looked at other people and I thought, well, he's a real engineer. He went to college. He's a real professor. That guy has a professional job, which I couldn't do. And to learn in middle age that I was not defective, I was this guy with Asperger's, and in fact, I was the equal of all those people. They just did different things than me. That was a very liberating and empowering realization.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I'm empowered just looking at the list of things you do. I appreciate you for making me question what have I done with my life up to this point, because by comparison, you've pretty much done everything. And just looking at the list of accomplishments, I think what impressed me most is that you actually designed guitars for Kiss. That's awesome.
That's true. And my first experience with your fine state here.
Oh, wow.
Playing a Pontiac Silverdome, coming out here playing rock and roll in Detroit and Pontiac and Lansing and stuff. I loved doing that. And it's funny, people now they say things like you. They say, well, you did all this cool stuff, but when I was doing that cool stuff, I would have given anything to be able to be a legitimate guy like you, somebody who would go to college and get a regular steady job, because you look at what I did and you think, boy, that's really exciting. I wish I could have done that. And I was looking at guys like you and thinking what I would give to just have a job and know I could go to work at the counseling center and they weren't just going to fire me at the end of the week. And so I guess for each of us, it's sort of like the grass is greener. You think I did all these different things, and I think I had to do one different thing after another to survive because I couldn't do the ordinary things.
Right. I actually feel like we're a kindred spirit in a lot of areas outside of the activism, and I tell my father I have a 23-month at home. But it's interesting because in my line of work, working with students with disabilities, working with students who need accommodations, you always hear this underlying concept of, they triumphed in spite of, or, they were able to achieve despite challenges or all these other things. And you did much of these amazing accomplishments in your life before you even knew that there was a diagnosis to attach to that. Did you ever get to a point, or now that you've written your books, or now that you've been a public speaker, did anyone come to you and say, you're an inspiration despite your challenges, you're an inspiration despite being diagnosed with Asperger's?
People sometimes say that. Other people in the disability community are offended at that. And you know, they, well, I mean, I would say it would be just like people, you know, would find it offensive if you went up to somebody and say, boy, you know, you did really well, you know, for a black guy or for a Hispanic person, you know, and you would say, well, who are you to say that? Why would you think I would be any less than any of you?
Exactly.
And I think that in my growing up, since people didn't know I had a difference that would truly disadvantage me, and that's a big difference between, say, advocacy for people with disabilities and advocacy for people who are racially or ethnically or culturally diverse, because those groups don't have a fundamental functional disadvantage. People with disabilities can. Nobody knew that about me. Right. So if anything, they expected just as much of me as anyone else. And now, when I look back on that time, I wouldn't say I succeeded despite being autistic. I would say that being autistic was actually a key to my success. I think that it was a key to my success in that I have a great power of concentration and focus that's a gift of autism. But I also think that there is an element of that Johnny Cash and the Boy Named Sue story, right? That because I was autistic and I was isolated and I didn't have friends and I didn't have disability supports, I didn't have anything to take care of me, so I had to go make it on my own. And I guess for those reasons, I think it would be fairer to say I am successful because I am different, not in spite of it.
Exactly. I always tell people, they always talk about different versus normal, and normal is just a setting on the washing machine. I don't necessarily adhere to, you know, concepts of different versus concepts of, you know, this is your ability level, this is what you're able to do, this is the box that we have to find for you to be able to succeed within. Yeah,
I'm not really a big believer in anyone that would be walking into a disability or a special services accommodation office at your college seeking to be successful despite difference or disability. I really believe that you don't go fight people who don't want you. If they don't like your kind, whatever it is, if you're somebody who doesn't like autistic people, you think we're rude, we're obnoxious, we say the wrong things, that's fine. I think I should go somewhere where people don't think that, because there are people who don't feel that way. And when I go among people who welcome me and I exercise my abilities, for one group of people, my abilities make me a freak. For another group of people, the same abilities make me a star. And so my task to be successful, if you will, is to find the community that will appreciate me. And I think that's the very same task that all of your students face at this school, to find a community where we're wanted.
I would agree. It's very interesting, especially when you talk about visible disabilities versus invisible disabilities. There comes those time periods by which, at the moment that you enter into college, you've already been giving all of these labels. You've already been giving all of these inroads. Not necessarily roads without ending, but saying, you know, this is going to be your life. You know, because of your diagnosis, you're only going to be able to do these particular jobs, or you're not as intelligent as these people, so college isn't even an option for you. So what we do is, and within our office and within offices like ours, is really try to give those students hope and really try to give them the expectancy not just to attend college, but to graduate. So I'm confident that your conversation this evening will give them that same hope.
I think that when people read my stories, one thing that I'm proud to offer in them is a legitimate sense of hope and possibility, because anyone who comes into your office has already made it to being a college student, right? They got accepted here and they're enrolled in a school, which I never achieved. And so they can say, well, I'm interested in this or that, and you could look at my story and you could say, well, Robison went out and he had this idea of getting into electronics and music, or had this idea about starting a business fixing cars, and look, he did it. And so for everything that's described in my words here or in my books, you can go online and you can see that kind of stuff for yourself. And I think that the things that I've done because I did them as an individual. I wasn't somebody in a huge multi-million-dollar corporation. I didn't have big grants behind me. Mm-hmm. So in principle, anyone at your school could do what I did. You know, I started basically with nothing, and I have made a living off the product of my eccentric mind, if you will.
And things you're passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe in it, and I think about it, and it is still true today. There are people who would think I'm a weirdo freak, and there's people who think that I'm great and smart and creative, and it's the very same person they're saying it about. And I'm sure almost everyone who walks into your service office, the same could be said of them.
I agree. It's interesting you were talking about your creativity and being able to utilize that. I was watching an interview that you did in 2008 with Jennifer Venditti, the director of Billy the Kid, where you had talked about, she had asked you if you were given a pill and that you could, magically no longer have Asperger's, would you take it? And I thought that your response to that was just so inspiring, and it was not necessarily the content of what you're saying, but that whole notion that, why should I try to take something to become quote unquote normal, when I have all of these other attributes that is, the result of me having this diagnosis. I would be losing the creativity and the ingenuity, and
I would lose everything that I am if I did that. One important thing that I think young people don't always realize, because they don't necessarily have the life experience to have seen it, is that if you're a person who thinks differently for whatever reason, you can become a star by solving problems other people can't solve, not because you are smarter than them, not because you're superior, and not because you're humanity 2.0, simply because you think differently. So if 100 other people try and figure something out, they fail because they are approaching it the same way, and they went to the same school and were educated in the same way, and you were a failure in school, and you taught yourself how to do these things, and you look at the problem and the solution to you is obvious. And you can be that person that somebody said, well, he's not smart enough, he's not as smart as the average kid. And it doesn't matter that they said you weren't as smart as the average kid, you still figured out what they couldn't figure out. And if you can do that, you will show your worth in the community. And as you show your value to the community of man around you, you're going to be embraced and welcomed. And I think that's a path to success for any of us. We do not have to be better. We just have to use our different abilities to the benefit of our wider group.
It's difficult for not just youth, but for adults to just be authentic and be yourself and be confident and being accepting of who you are and what your challenges are and your abilities. So just even being in that mindset of saying, because I think differently, that is my strength, as opposed to saying, because I'm not like everyone else, that puts me at a disadvantage.
That's a difficult balance, especially for young people to walk. It's like passing for normal, if you will. Sometimes people are critical when I say, well, you have, on the one hand, you have a right to ask that society be accommodating. And if you're different and eccentric, you got a right to live your life without being bullied or victimized or marginalized. But at the same time, you've got to recognize that legislation doesn't control how people feel.
Right.
And if you act like a jerk, you're going to be treated like one. And every person has maybe not a responsibility, but every person has to choose to learn to act in ways that the wider society is going to find at least minimally acceptable. And if you don't do that, you will not be able to join society. Now, at some point, there may be a line where you can't do a certain thing that society expects, and maybe people can say that's discrimination. But I would argue that for most of us, we can learn a basic set of rules that will cause people to accept us. We may not be able to look at another person and look in their eyes and know what they're thinking, but we certainly can teach ourselves, if we are walking towards a door and there is another person next to us, we will step smartly to the door and pull it open and stand there while they go in. And then, if we say something weird when we're inside, the fellow thinks, well, a guy held the door to me and he said hello and he shook my hand. He must be an okay guy.
Right.
And I believe anyone can learn that. And I think that's a really, really important thing to take to heart.
Absolutely.
To embrace the idea that there's got to be a balance between us having a responsibility to behave acceptably and society having a responsibility to treat us fairly.
There's always this trade-off, especially when you're talking about, you said legislation, we talk about the ADA, we talk about compliance, we talk about the Rehabilitation Act, we talk about the things that have been put in place to ensure that things are accessible. But it's always been this mindset where, we want individuals to adapt to our environment as opposed to adapting to the environment for other individuals, making it so that people are more aware. And there's been a considerable amount of work in trying to make sure that people are aware of what autism is and that people are aware of what the nuances are and things of that nature so that they're better equipped so that people aren't just automatically assuming that, this individual is weird or this individual is immannerable or they're not socially apt, things of that nature. And you actually work with the organization, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Well, I serve on the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, which is the top-level autism committee for the federal government, and we formulate the strategic plan for autism. We certainly look at issues that we need to confront as a society. We look at holes in our scientific knowledge. We look at holes in our services for people with autism. We look at holes in our deficiencies in our education system. At the school level, I'm actually the Neurodiversity Scholar in Residence at the College of William and Mary in Virginia. And William and Mary has one of the first neurodiversity initiatives at a major university in the United States. So, I am involved in, in bringing that message both to the public through government service and in my work with schools. And of course, going around and speaking at schools like yours.
Awesome. I was actually reading and you spoke about diversity earlier in our conversation. You kind of brought up neuroscience here recently. In higher education, we're always talking about diversity. It's like the new buzzword. And we're always talking about race and gender, and we're talking about religion, we're talking about sexual orientation, all these other aspects, but disability and ability in general is always left out of the conversation. I was fascinated to read your blog and see that this concept that you were talking about, neurodiversity. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, neurodiversity is that idea that I described, that some people are different because their brains are wired differently. They didn't get sick, they didn't sustain an injury, they simply were born different. And that would include people with ADHD, it would include many people with autism, it would include perhaps some portion of the population with bipolar disorders, maybe some people with depression. And if we look at the creative things that have been given to our world, the scientific inventions, the great works of music, the great works of art, it seems like every one of those people is touched by some kind of madness or mania or psychosis, And I think that's an example of what I said earlier. Those people aren't necessarily smarter or better or whatever, but they're different. And because they're different, their ordinary product of their mind is unique to everyone else. And the idea of neurodiversity is that we need to recognize that that kind of diversity is essential for our society to be healthy. Just as we now say that racial diversity, for example, is an essential trait. We look at the different races on Earth, and we say, well, these folks grew up in the Arctic in a very hostile climate, and these folks grew up in the desert in a hostile climate, and these folks, evolved in the jungle in a hostile climate. Each of those people has certain evolved strengths. And so the thinking now is that by blending those things together, we have a greater whole. And I think the idea of neurodiversity is that by blending together people who are neurologically diverse, we achieve the same benefit. So you might not have the vivid colors in your mind of somebody who has psychotic episodes and is a brilliant painter, and you might not have the ability to create music like this chronically depressed guy that you know, and you might not have the ability to see into computing systems like this autistic guy that you know. But together, the four of you are greater than any individual. And I think really it's a very powerful idea. And it's one that I think it's an idea whose time has really come.
I couldn't agree more. There are more conversations about how can we prevent these individuals from achieving education, how can we prevent these individuals from permeating into our employment ranks. Because how do we know because they have some type of mental illness if they're going to be safe to work with? Or are they going to be able to complete the tasks, because they have bipolar disorder? They're going to be out of school all the time,
And of course, that is just straight fear-mongering. I mean, any person who grew up, especially in America, as a racial minority, you heard. I was a kid in the South in the '60s, and you heard, they're dangerous. They're gonna murder you. They're gonna whatever.
Right.
And it was total fantasy. There was never any foundation in reality for that. And we look at disability groups now, and we read that people with depression, they could turn and kill you. They could go, somebody with psychosis could go psychotic and kill you. Somebody with autism
What do you do if they're off their meds?
Yeah, and the truth is, people with disabilities of any kind are far more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. They are far more likely to be the victim of almost any kind of crime. The violence that they are involved in tends to be either self-directed or reactive to attacks from others. People with disabilities of all kinds are far less likely to turn on you than angry people.
Right.
If you want to pick a group of people to be wary of, it would be angry people. And angry people come in all neurological orientations. They come in both sexes, they come in all races, they come in all religions.
Right.
If we were to pick a problem, that would be it, not what I think you're serving in your office.
I agree. That's the epitome of dis-ease or disease, is people who are angry and many times for no reason and unfounded and just simply afraid of what they don't understand.
And anyone can be angry. That's probably really the biggest overlooked thing. It's like the elephant in the room in mental illness. It's just like people don't really talk about alcohol as being a hazard and all these other drugs. They're a terrible scourge. And anger is the big problem, not neurological diversity and not racial diversity and not religious diversity.
Right. And is that anger founded in something? If you have to go your entire life and hear, you're not enough, you're not as good as, you have all these other isms that are placed in your way, and then you get to the point where you're ready to proceed forward, you're ready to go to school, you're ready to get a job, and you've got one more barrier. That set me off. But
I wish I knew how to answer how that played out for me, because sometimes people come up to me and they say, I wish you could tell me what to say to my son. He's just so angry, at school. And I remember all too well why people are angry. You have people call you a retard and call you all kinds of things. Of course you're going to be angry.
Exactly.
And you're going to be hurt. And you're going to be sad. And I think the thing that saved me from being swallowed up by anger was finding success when I withdrew as a child. Because when people called me those names and they didn't want to have me around them, I retreated into electronics and music because that was what I was interested in, and I concentrated on it, and it was always good to me. When I made an electronic device, even if I was working on a radio and I put it together and it went up in smoke, nobody did it to me. I knew that I put those parts together and it went up in smoke. It was not a conspiracy or a trick. There was nobody standing back there laughing.
Right.
And eventually, when I figured it out, they worked when I put them together. And I was so proud, and I felt that success and I felt good about myself. And And you know, I was a failure with other people, but I was a success with those machines. And I think that's what saved me from anger as a young person. And I think that the success with machines made me acceptable to other people. Because when I succeeded in making equipment for musicians, I went out into the world of musicians. And maybe other people would have still mocked me and called me names or whatever. Although that doesn't happen so much when you're 19 and 20, that kind of goes away. But people might not necessarily have been real friendly to me. In the community of musicians, though, I was great because I was the guy who could make the amplifiers sing.
Right.
And so my ability to talk to the machines helped me to talk to the people. And that was my salvation from anger.
Awesome. I wanted to ask you this one question. Specifically, like I said, I consider myself an activist, and you are an activist as well. For those individuals who would like to be an activist, or they are passionate about issues that surround the autism spectrum, and they might have a family member, or they might be the parent of a child, or they might be themselves an individual who has autism, what message would you like for them to receive?
Well, I would say that you should just really follow your heart and don't let people twist you into being something that you're not. Always remember that you've got to learn how to be polite so the world will accept you, but you don't have to be fake and untrue to yourself. And I'll give you a good analogy. When you're standing there and a girl comes down the hall towards you and you think she looks really pretty in that red shirt, you can tell any girl in the world she looks pretty in that red shirt and it will be okay. Now, if she comes down the hall in a striped green shirt and you think she looks like a weirdo freak, if you give her a good piece of advice and tell her she looks like a weirdo freak, you will almost always be in trouble. But if you keep your mouth shut, nothing will happen.
Right.
So you can say she's pretty in the red shirt, you can keep your mouth shut when she has the other shirt, and you are true to yourself both times, and that's an acceptable behavior.
Right.
Speaking your mind all the time will get you in trouble. So that's what I would say to them.
I'm with you. It's like, I think it was Henry Ford that said, if you think you can, or if you think you can't, either way you're right.
Yeah. So
I wanted to ask you if you could do one thing for me.
Yeah.
I have something I would like to show you. 1 second.
Okay.
If I may. We have been doing a campaign on campus trying to raise awareness around issues of disability. And in honor of your coming to speak, we did a poster around autism. And it says, I'm beautiful, not broken, different, not defective. I may not make eye contact, but at least I don't stare. I have autism. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just waiting on you to enter my world. Would you mind signing this for our office?
Sure.
I would love that.
I'll have to use your pen, right?
Absolutely. I think I can accommodate that. And here you are. I just really appreciate your words of wisdom today, and I look forward to your message this evening. And hopefully this won't be the last time you come to our great state of Michigan, let alone the College of Grand Rapids.
There you are.
Awesome.
Geeks rule.
That we do. I appreciate it so much. Thank you again for coming to speak
Well,
with us.
thank you for having me out. See you.
Not a problem.